now.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Carrie Moy with the Department of Family and Support Services, Homeless Service Division, and we're going to talk about today the Centralized Shelter Intake, Transportation, and Crisis Response, RFP. I just want to make sure that we are recording, Tom.
Yes, I have it recording.
Fantastic. And Tom's going to take us through some housekeeping.
Hi everyone, my name is Tom Mose. I work at Department of Family and Support Services, and I'm on the call today to provide technical assistance for the webinar. So just want to let you all know that due to the volume of the participants, everyone's been placed on mute. We're going to have you submit your questions via the question box in your dashboard, and we respond to the questions after going through the slides. There should be a place to go through the questions after Carrie's presentation and then again after Julia's presentation. And then if there's any technical issues, just use your question box in your dashboard, which is on your right-hand side, to notify me. And I'll do my best to help fix any issues. And with that, we'll go to the next slide so Carrie can go over the agenda and welcome and introductions.
Thanks, Tom. So we also have Julia on this call. Julia, do you want to give yourself an introduction?
Oh, yeah. Hi, this is Julia Talbot. I'm the person that manages the RFP process for the department. If you've been on a webinar before for this department, you've no doubt heard or talked to me, or if you've ever had a question about e-procurement in relationship to DFSS, you've no doubt talked to me as well. I'll be coming after Carrie and talking about how to do the application in e-procurement and more technical aspects of making that application.
Thanks. So we're going to run through the purpose of the RFP, the services included, our priorities, our department's priorities for improvement through this RFP, the selection criteria, what attachments do you need to attach, and the timeline. Then we'll pause for questions. Then Julia's going to jump into her technical assistance for applicants, and then we'll pause again for questions. And during those pauses, we are going to ask you all to put your questions in the question box, just so we have a record and to keep things a little more simple so we don't talk over each other. Next slide, please. So this RFP, it kind of fits into DFSS's overall strategy, and I just threw this slide in here to share that with you. DFSS launched the strategic framework in 2016 and refreshed its mission and department-wide priorities, which are listed below, and we are in line with this. Next slide, please. Through this RFP, the Homeless Service Division of the Department of Family and Support seeks an organization to provide centralized shelter intake, transportation, and crisis response to effectively meet the needs of vulnerable Chicagoans who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. You're looking for an agency to manage a real-time bed inventory as well as provide shelter referral, transportation, and crisis response services. This agency, the agency who will take over the work in this RFP, will be the first point of contact for Chicagoans seeking shelter after Chicago's 311 city services. They will need to quickly connect Chicagoans experiencing housing crisis or domestic violence to shelter with a seamless trauma-informed response. So you're going to see those two things go hand in hand. We need an agency to take a lead and a responsibility of understanding where all the beds are that are open in the city at any one time and helping connect people to those beds. And that connection needs to be quick because we are, through this, working with people who are in housing crisis or experiencing domestic violence. And I also wanted to highlight that the agency who replies to this RFP needs to be able to respond to non-life-threatening requests for assistance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and anywhere in the city. I am so sorry if you're hearing my neighbor's dog right now. The joys of working from home. So let's go to the next slide, please. Great. So I kind of wanted to go into the services included in this RFP because it is a complex RFP with a lot of different pieces. So while the centralized shelter intake, transportation, and crisis response RFP is designed to be responsive to a variety of needs, one of the most significant roles is the conduit into the homeless and domestic violence shelter system. DFSS is unique across the country in seeking to reduce barriers to shelter access by funding a single delegate agency to transport, refer, and place residents facing homelessness into open beds across the city. Additionally, the awarded agency will serve as a central clearinghouse for shelter beds for single individuals and collaborate with the delegate agency responsible for maintaining the clearinghouse for family beds to maintain a real-time inventory of available beds throughout the system. So to achieve that goal, the respondent must be able to build supportive relationships with shelter providers and establish a clear process for communication. And I think one thing worth calling out in there is that you're going to see us refer to a centralized bed clearinghouse and a real-time bed inventory. And those terms are pretty much interchangeable. We think of like a singles clearinghouse and a families clearinghouse that come together to become the real-time bed inventory, but they are kind of very similar things, just to give you a heads up when you're reading the RFP. So let's go into how people ask for shelter. So requests for shelter come from people who are experiencing homelessness or are survivors of domestic violence. And a client, I think I've jumped a little ahead of myself, but 311 gets a call. They hand it off to this delegate agency through a computer system, and then the agency will call the client back to ask more details about what their needs are, and then to try and place them in the correct shelter bed, then provide transportation to that shelter placement. So the client will have to contact clients, conduct assessments, identify appropriate placements, and provide transportation. They'll have to manage and staff a central facility for single individuals awaiting shelter placement at 10 South Kedzie, and provide shelter diversion for single individuals. So whereas as the first thing I talked about, the connecting to shelter, this is something that can happen over the phone or through a computer system. This central point for individuals is a physical place where people wait for shelter, and it needs to be staffed. This delegate agency will also have to respond to requests for well-being checks. The majority of these well-being checks are for seniors, and they come through the same 311 system. They will also have to respond or support the city's response for a variety of crisis situations, which is assisting victims of fire or other disasters, supporting the city's crisis response through general outreach and engagement, transportation, extreme weather events, mass care services, and emergency vacate orders. The full program requirements, the full description of these services are defined in the program requirement section of the RFP, and that's always a good place to look for reference. And I guess I would like to say the image on this slide is to say that while there's all distinct services we're asking an agency to provide, they also all have to work together and connect and flow smoothly. So next slide, please. So I wanted to run through some of the priorities for improvement that we are hoping to see through this RFP process. So as I said before, Chicagoans experiencing housing crisis primarily seek shelter through 311. The current delegate responded to approximately 2,600 service requests in 2019. Of those, shelter placement transportation services were 87% of the total requests. If you're looking for an idea of how much work this is, or the amount of requests that are going to be for shelter placement, it's 87% of the total requests. So our priority for improvement is, in an effort to remove any barrier in the way of someone in crisis connecting to the appropriate resources, DFSS is interested in partnering with the awarded agency to evaluate and improve the number and accessibility of pickup locations and overall speed of response. So there are three parts to that we want to have. We want to have lots of pickup locations. We want to have pickup locations that are accessible, and we want a response that is quick, because we know that people who call for this service are in crisis and need services quickly. So prior to the COVID crisis, police stations and emergency rooms were used as pickup locations. In response to the COVID crisis, transportation to shelter was provided from any address in the city, and DFSS prefers that the pickup locations continue to be at any location in the city moving forward. But the pickup locations may change at DFSS's request during the term of the awarded contract. Next slide, please. So our other priority for improvement is the shelter placement rate. And right now, the current delegate agency reports the number of requests to shelter they receive and the number of clients placed in shelter. And when we look at these two numbers together, we call that the placement rate. DFSS is interested in better understanding the number of requests for shelter and how often there's a much higher number of requests for shelter than placements. We hope to work with the selected delegate to focus on the placement rate as an opportunity for improvement during this contract. The placement rate is both a key indicator of successful management of this contract, but most importantly, that Chicagoans experiencing housing crisis are best able to access the support they need. DFSS will work with the delegate agency to gain a better understanding of the factors driving the low placement rate and identify and remove barriers to shelter placement, identify the appropriate placement rate targets, and action steps to meet those goals. So I want to point out that there's 2 points here. One, that we have an idea of raw numbers, but we don't understand the information that's behind that, like what is driving this. Step one would be to do that, and step two would be to assess what is the appropriate placement rate and figure out how we can keep moving at improving it. Additionally, DFSS will take an equity-based approach to understanding and assessing disparities in the placement rate related to age, gender, race, sexual orientation, disability, neighborhood, language, or other identified categories. Next slide, please. So the final priority for improvement I'm going to talk about is maintaining an accurate bed inventory. To meet the crisis housing needs of people experiencing homelessness or domestic violence, Chicago has roughly 4,500 temporary shelter beds, serving both individuals and families. DFSS funds about 3,300 of these beds through 32 delegate agencies. This is a complex system, and we need to all be working together towards the same goal. And a big part of this RFP is maintaining that bed inventory, and to be that agency that ties that part of the system together. So we need the agency to maintain a list of available beds across the city. And DFSS is interested in improving the accuracy of that inventory as well as its accessibility to DFSS staff, so that we can know at any time how many beds are open, or if there aren't enough beds being opened, or if there's an increase in requests. We need a way to keep an accurate count of that and communicate that to our staff. We believe daily organizing open coordination with shelters is critical to achieving this. And I'd like to point out that the organization selected through this contract will also have to work with Salvation Army's Emergency Homeless Assessment and Response Center, or EHARC, and they manage the family shelter bed, open beds for the city. So the agency who takes on this role will have to work with EHARC. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to jump into the selection criteria, and these align with the questions you're going to see when you go into the e-procurement system. But I won't here reference anything that's not already in the RFP. I just thought it might be helpful if we think about the RFP in terms of the questions that you guys will be answering. So this is a complex program, so I thought it's worth thinking through what all is included in this proposed program and the program requirements. I went over it a little before, but because this is such a complex RFP, I think it's worth running through again. But before I do that, I do want to point out that these services need to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and throughout the entire city. So the first one is maintaining the real-time shelter bed inventory, or the clearinghouse. We've talked about this a bit, but this serves as the central clearinghouse for shelter beds. And so we need to maintain an up-to-date and accurate inventory of available beds across the homeless system for single individuals, as well as coordinate family bed availability with EHARC that is operated by the Salvation Army. This contract also includes responding to shelter requests, so conducting intake and referrals to shelter. An agency will receive a shelter request from the 311 Salesforce system, contact the client, conduct an intake assessment, assist households with identifying safe alternatives to shelter if that's appropriate, and then match households to shelter, including domestic violence shelters, based on need of the family or the individual and availability of beds, and to update the 311 system with progress notes and on referrals. The next part is transportation support. So there's dispatch and transportation support. Sorry, let me start over. There's dispatch and transportation to shelter. So you'll need to coordinate transportation of clients from their location or designated locations to shelter or other placements. That other placements is kind of a category we put in there. Sometimes people need to go to a different service provider, like a drug treatment program. You also have to maintain a vehicle fleet. So the respondents will be responsible for determining the number and types of vehicles needed to provide this service. And we have other requirements too, like all vehicles need to be labeled and you'll have to have the correct insurance. And then there's other transportation needs. So as assigned by DFSS, provide relocation assistance, support for outreach and engagement initiatives, and other transportation for crisis response activities that we're going to cover on the next slide. So there is a very clear transportation to shelter, but then there's other transportation needs that arise, maybe transporting individuals between shelters if there's a change, or from a cooling center to a shelter. So it is a broader category than just transportation to shelter. So then I wanted to talk about the physical space for singles. This is located at 10 South Kedzie in the Garfield Community Service Center. You need to provide an on-site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, crisis management and waiting area for singles seeking shelter. And singles, when we think about homelessness and how we think about the beds in our system, we have beds for singles and we have beds for families. And so families go through EHARC, but we have a central waiting place at 10 South Kedzie for singles. And within this contract, the agency who takes this contract will have to maintain that staffing of that facility. There are more details in the RFP. And then within that work, within providing this physical space for singles, you'll also have to provide shelter diversion for singles. Shelter diversion is a brief intervention that takes place when a client first touches the homeless system. It empowers persons facing imminent homelessness to identify safe and appropriate housing options that are an alternative to shelter. The practice of diversion is built on experienced, well-trained staff or diversion experts capable of facilitating a conversation that fosters creative solutions for alternative housing options outside of shelter. And I would encourage you that if in your response within the questions that you identify how that would happen and how you will find a person or train a person to do that very specialized role. And then on this slide, I also talk about the crisis response, but because it is such a complicated category in itself, we're going to just go to the next slide and look at it more deeply. Oh, I'm behind, I'm sorry. There we go. So to give you an idea of, so we're gonna dig into crisis response, but to give you an idea of how much of the work that you do fits into this bucket, of the 2,600 service requests that the delegate agency received last year, 6% were well-being checks, 4% were crisis referrals, and then about 3% were the other things like fire assistance and relocation assistance. But those are the requests that come through the Salesforce system. So DFSS can also request this type of support, and that wouldn't be reflected in those numbers. So one of the most consistent aspects of this crisis response work is well-being checks. And I will say that the majority of these well-being checks are senior well-being checks. So our well-being check can be arranged for any Chicagoan. You will receive well-being check requests from the 311 Salesforce system. Visit the homes of at-risk seniors and Chicagoans to verify that the resident is safe and well. And you will have to follow up with, which might include referrals to the DFSS Senior Services Division, depending on need, and coordinate with the Chicago Police Department as needed. So then I wanted to say that the rest of the things we're going to talk about here in crisis response or responding to emergency situations. So the services that I'm about to talk about will supplement the city's homeless outreach and prevention, which we call HOP team, and cover emergencies, overnight, and weekend service gaps in city's outreach staffing. So there's the assistance for victims of fire and other disasters, general outreach and engagement, canvassing areas of the city to offer homeless residents access to shelter placement and other facilities like substance use treatment facilities, and transportation to these facilities. And the need for this will come through a request from DFSS. We also would include in this transportation and extreme weather. So to support the city's response to extreme weather events, as requested by DFSS, for example, increasing staffing to provide additional transportation for residents to the city and non-city operated warming and cooling centers, and to engage unsheltered residents. There's also staffing support in extreme weather. The city's 6 community service centers operate warming and cooling centers in extreme weather. The selected delegate will need to provide staff and coordination support during extreme weather events in some specific ways. So to support the city's staff capacity for outreach, manage client intakes at the Garfield Community Service Center, Warming and Cooling Center. So that's at 10 South Kedzie. We do operate a 24-hour warming and cooling center there. And within this contract, you would be required to staff that in the overnight hours. And coordinate with 6 other community service centers as needed. An example would be if we come to the end of when a community center's warming center is open, clients might need to be transported to another warming center that will remain open overnight. There's also mass care services. So supporting the city's response to citywide emergencies as requested by DFSS and directed by the Office of Emergency Management and Communications. An example here would be a mass location of impacted residents to temporary emergency shelters. And then we have emergency vacate orders. So relocate households displaced by eviction and vacate orders to shelter or alternative residence as requested by DFSS and relevant city agencies. So I guess I would like to see if you guys have any questions about this, because it is a complex group of supports, and they are all to support emergency situations. But I'm not seeing any questions come in, unless I'm not looking in the right box.
Oh, you're right, there's no questions yet.
Thank you.
You want to continue with this slide, or should we go to the next slide?
Yep. Oh, let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So I also wanted to highlight two of sort of the smaller categories within the strength of the proposed program that are very important to this RFP, and that is client feedback. For all our programs, DFSS thinks client feedback is a very important part of improving services, and there could be unique challenges to getting client feedback when the interaction is so short term, like it is for this RFP. So we are looking for creative approaches to collecting client feedback, because we do think it is still very important to understand how people who use this service experience it, and to build improvements from that. Another one I wanted to highlight was the importance of partnership and communication. Much of this RFP relies on good communication and partnership building with shelter providers and DFSS to maintain that real-time bed inventory, but for all aspects of this RFP. So we're hoping to find an agency that can build supportive relationships with shelter providers, establish a clear process for regular communication, recognize individual shelter strengths and place clients appropriately, and collaborate with the delegate agency responsible for maintaining the clearinghouse for family beds, which, as we talked about earlier, is EHARC with Salvation Army. All very important. Let's go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about performance management. The performance measures for this program are 75% of shelter placement requests will be completed within 3.5 hours. 75% of well-being checks will be completed within 3.5 hours. 75% of other transportation requests will be completed in 3.5 hours. And all of these have the remaining 25% being completed within 5 hours. The selected respondent is expected to complete and close 90% of the 311 City Services requests within 24 hours, and the remaining within 24 hours. And this is speaking specifically to the service requests that come through from 311. So they'll come through in a computer system, and we see it as very important that those requests are closed and notes are added as to how they were closed. Was the client transported to shelter, or could we not find the client? And we think there's a lot to learn from that, so we think it's critical that all those requests are closed. Now I want to jump into upcoming performance improvement priorities, and we did touch on this, but this is pretty important to us, so I would like to talk about it again. We want to better understand the factors driving the low placement rate and identify an appropriate placement rate target. We want to use an equity-based approach to understand and address disparities in the placement rate related to race, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability, neighborhood, or language. And then we want delegates in this in partnership with DFSS to identify system and process adjustments that can improve how our shelter system engages and connects with people experiencing homelessness. And we also expect that the delegate agency will meet regularly with DFSS to provide program updates and discuss program improvements. So when you're on the questions in the application that relate to performance management, I ask that you please share your agency's experience with performance providing this or similar programs and the results and accomplishments. And we do recognize that there's a lot of components contained within this RFP, and I think it is appropriate to talk about, if you don't currently have a program that has all of these components, it's okay to talk about multiple programs to cover your experience and meeting performance metrics in the different types of programs covered in this RFP. Also discuss your experience tracking and reporting on performance measures and leveraging data to identify areas for improvement. I think we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to run through what we're looking for in the organizational capacity section. And we are looking for an organization or a lead organization with subcontractors with the capacity to be the front door of our shelter system. Many times the first contact for someone experiencing housing crisis. Be able to build partnerships with shelter and outreach providers, operate 24/7, 365, have the ability to serve the entire city, have the ability to staff all the program requirements in this RFP, which is a small sentence, but a really big responsibility, and to be fully staffed, trained, and ready to provide services to provide all the services contained within this program at midnight on January 1st. And I really can't stress that one enough. If there happens to be a change in delegate agency, we can't have a gap in this service. The services contained in this RFP are critical, and there can't be downtime. The organization should also have experience working with people in crisis situations and people experiencing homelessness or domestic violence. And they should have staff that are trained and have a training program in place so that all of their staff are able to work with people in crisis situations. And we also want an organization that reflects and engages the diverse people and experiences of the community served. Next slide, please. Our final selection criteria is cost and budget. And just to go over some touch points that are worth thinking about and not forgetting, we are looking for organizations that are good financial stewards, have sufficient cash flow to operate this contract, and the capacity to expend funds prior to reimbursement, and have a reasonable budget and clear rationale for budget decisions. And we'll talk more about budget a little bit on the next slide. So the next slide, please. I wanted to give this reminder, and I think Julia will probably also remind you to do this, but including your attachments in your RFP is really important. You must attach all the required documentation. And I have that with the little square red bullets on this slide. It's important and critical and needed. But I want to call out some important attachments that we will use when we're trying to fully understand your answers to the application questions. And so they're very important to us to fully understand your response to this RFP. So be sure to attach report studies or other documentation that shows performance towards reaching the goals, reaching the program goals, and demonstrates results and accomplishments. We definitely look for that, and we compare it to how you answer those questions about performance requirements. And then be sure to attach resumes for key staff that are overseeing the program. We absolutely understand that an agency is not going to be staffed up to provide this diverse range of services right now, but we do want to see the resumes for the key staff who will be overseeing this program. And that's super important to us. And be sure to attach your organization's budget to this program. And I want to stress to make sure that all the program requirements or all the ways you describe how you're going to run this program are addressed in the budget. So if you write me a beautiful section about how you're going to provide this service, but I don't see that in your budget, it sort of presents a split picture. So just make sure that when you're proposing work, that work then shows up in your budget. And this is my last slide, so I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing my voice, but one more and we can get through it. I wanted to talk about selection and transition timeline. So our applications are due at noon on September 10th. And you'll hear that repeated again because it's very important. Please don't wait till the last minute to start your application. But Julia will go over that in detail. And the award announcements are anticipated in late September. So in the event there is a change from our current vendor, I'd like to run through our delegate agency transition. So transition planning with leadership of the selected delegate agency will start in September after award letters are received. So we do anticipate that completely identifying this transition plan will happen with the delegate agency for this contract. And then we see a co-training and handoff process happening in December. And the transition process will need to be designed to limit disruption of services for people experiencing housing crisis, for partner agencies that rely on efficient placement services, and all other groups and systems that rely on these very critical services. And one thing I can't stress enough is that all services included in this program will need to begin at midnight on January 1st, 2021. Can we go to the next slide and take a pause for questions? So I see from Tammy Morris, will this be, let me make sure I'm seeing your whole question, Tammy. I think I am. Tom, you can jump in if I'm making a mistake here. Will this be favorable for new startup women's shelter? I guess I'm not sure what this is referring to in that question, Tammy. Are 999s okay in lieu of a financial statement? Let me look into that, and we're going to send out Q&As for all of these questions, and I'll make sure we get the right answer for that one in the box. I'm not sure, and I don't want to give you any kind of incorrect answer. Will your team be available to ask additional questions? Yep, my email address is at the end of this presentation, and we will have I don't know if we set up the timeline for when we need all questions in by, but if you could get your questions as soon as possible, I will make sure those are included in the question answer document that is released. I'm sorry, Tammy, I'm going to try. Will this be favorable for new startup women's shelter for the overall grant program? I'm really sorry, Tammy. I'm not understanding your question.
This is Tom assisting you today.
Thank you.
I think what he was asking was on a previous slide, so if she could be more specific, because that question came in when you were towards the end of your presentation, so it could have been a question about performance management or selection criteria. So if that question could just be rewritten a little bit more specifically for that, I think that's what they were referring to. But I don't see any other questions so far.
Thanks, Tom. I would say that this RFP is related to the need for additional shelter beds, if that's what you're asking, Tammy. Would this RFP be supportive of connecting people to any shelter beds that do open up in the city? Then yes, they would. But this RFP is not for providing shelter. This RFP is about connecting clients who need shelter to that shelter, both through a shelter placement and through transportation. Oh, good. Thanks, Tammy. I really appreciate that. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Julia to run through the technical assistance part of this presentation. Thanks, Tammy. And then at the end, we'll pause for questions again. So if anything comes into your mind, just feel free to put it in that questions box. Thank you. Go ahead, Julia.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carrie. So just to remind everybody, applications are due on September 10th, 2020 at noon. There are no extensions. We cannot accept late applications, and we can only accept applications through the e-procurement system. So now I'm going to go into how do you do an application in e-procurement, what does that look like, and we're going to go through two common things that everybody's going to have to do as part of the application process. We'll go through how to accept an amendment and how to submit your application. But first, I'm just going to give you some sort of pro tips. As Carrie indicated, I always tell people to start early. Our applications can be a little on the technical side. Our RFPs are dense, rich documents in terms of there's a lot of information that's jammed into those things. They're not easy reading. So I can only encourage people to give yourselves a lot of time to really be able to get deep into the RFP. The RFPs are carefully crafted in that, and they align with, each piece of the RFP aligns with the rest of the RFP, and we do that very intentionally. If you've never done business with the City of Chicago, you need to register into iSupplier or e-procurement as quickly as possible. It's going to take 3 to 5 business days, maybe a little shorter, maybe a little longer, for you to get an access from the Department of Procurement Services to get into the e-procurement service, the e-procurement environment. So if you haven't done that, if you're a new organization, you should definitely do that right away so that you can get access to everything you'll need and be able to start working on your application as quickly as possible. So as I was sort of alluding to prior, review the RFP narrative, the application's questions closely, and remember that they align with the scope and selection criteria also in the RFP, and use the information in the RFP for guidance in formulating your answers. This is, it's when I've reviewed a lot of applications over the many years I've been doing this, as have everybody in the department, and it's always frustrating when you have an organization that is capable of doing the work, and we ask a specific question that would hopefully they would take as an opportunity to highlight their competence and creative thoughts and enthusiasm and experience, and they choose to answer a different question than what was asked. So carefully review the questions, carefully review what's in the scope and the narrative portions of the RFP, carefully review that selection criteria, and that's really going to tell you what we are kind of looking for in terms of an answer, and let that guide you. You don't have to, I know from experience that a lot of people approach the application process by they really start working on the application questions without really looking at the RFP document. And I think that's where sometimes people get off track in terms of their answers and in telling us information or demonstrating strengths that we're not asking for, as opposed to the ones that we are asking for, even if, and then you get marked down. So I would just say carefully review the RFP, the selection criteria, understand that the selection criteria is directly connected to and falls out of the scope and narrative section of the RFP, that the application questions are developed directly from the scope and narrative and aligned with that selection criteria, and that we use that selection criteria in developing our evaluation tool and the guidance on how to rank or how to score questions. So it's all tied up and it all links to that evaluation tool. And so we really want you to really be able to score highly on that. So just pay careful attention to what we're asking for and put your best ideas and foot forward. While you're doing that, there's a 4,000 character limit to every text box for every application question. So that's not, each response is allotted 4,000 characters as opposed to 4,000 characters for the entire application, which would be not enough. That character limit includes punctuation and spaces, and the e-procurement system isn't going to count that character limit for you. So I suggest that you really that you put you write your application questions in a Word document or whatever word processing software you're using. Use that character count for each. Save that document, because ultimately when you submit your application in e-procurement, the e-procurement system is going to suck it away and you're really never going to see it again. So if you want to know what you said, you really need to have a different, you need to have another document. The e-procurement system works best with the Internet Explorer browser. I have had it work fine with Chrome, with Mozilla Foxfire, maybe a few others. If your computer is not getting along with this, with e-procurement, I suggest you do it in the Explorer browser. That's what the e-procurement platform was developed on Explorer, and so in theory it works best in Explorer, as much as I and maybe many other people don't like Explorer. Don't use the back button on your browser. E-procurement, that's like one of those little like tricky things. If you use the back browser button to navigate through e-procurement, it will pretend that it's like saving your stuff, but when you go to save it, you'll get an error message and it will throw you out. And so that is, yeah, just don't use that back browser, that back button on your browser, because it's gonna just be awful. So another few things, when I'm working in e-procurement, I save all the time. This system will time out after about 10 minutes, and then you'll have to re-log in. But just, I say start early, save often. Don't use that back browser button. The system really, I've been working in e-procurement for 3 years now, it doesn't crash. Sometimes it might, if it's slow, it tends to be on the user end. It's a very big program, but it works very quickly. I've had literally tens of hundreds of people in that system all working on it, and it's fine. But give yourself a lot of time. It will time out on you if you don't pay attention to it. And so it's but if it feels glitchy to you, it probably has something to do with your computer's interface with e-procurement as opposed to the system going down. If you find yourself in a corner and you are really going on the last, going to the last second on that submission deadline, and all of a sudden you get kicked out of e-procurement, it means that you've actually missed the submission deadline. So what it will do when you're like, just so that you know, a lot of people will be like, I was working and I had time and it got, all of a sudden it just kicked me out and then I couldn't find my application. That is what happens when the application period closes. E-procurement will grab your application and take it away from you. If you've submitted it, that's great, not a problem. If you haven't, then you'll never see it again, unfortunately. So let's go to the next slide. And so here a little bit more. One of the things on following up with that, you can submit your application and later amend it up until the due date. You can't amend it after the due date, but if you submit your application on September 8th and you're like, oh my God, I really want to change this question. Oh, I want to upload this thing. I forgot. You can pull it back and resubmit. You can do that as many times as you want, not a problem. It's good because that's a little bit of insurance in terms of a placeholder. If for some reason you missed the application deadline, you have a partially uploaded or partially saved submitted application, it will be in there. We can see that you were trying to do this, but that's one thing that you can do. I also say avoid the rush and possible mishaps by submitting early. I personally tell people to submit the day before, just in case. Save yourself the stress of an anxiety of taking it to the line. I would plan on submissions taking 30 to 60 minutes, and when I go through the slides on how to submit an application, you'll just see it's not unhot. It's fairly common that you'll get error messages that need to be resolved, and that those error messages sometimes are worded in a way that is tricky, and so you need to give yourself a little bit of time to sort of understand what the error message is about so that you can resolve it. As I've said, late applications will not be accepted. We can't do it. The only way we can do it is to repost the entire RFP again and make everybody reapply. That we prefer to not do that. If you have problems or questions, or you just want to talk to somebody about e-procurement, we have a helpline, which is 312-744-HELP, which is 4357. In case you want to know that. That hotline works 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You can also call me. I don't have as much access to e-procurement in terms of really resolving a tough issue, but I can help you with basic stuff. My email and phone number is at the end of this PowerPoint, and it's also all over the RFP itself. Probably it's all over. I'm on every RFP, so it's not hard to find that. You can call me. I work also Monday through Friday 9 to 5, but I tend to answer my phone during the weekends or off hours if you're really stuck. And then, save early and submit often is what I really like to tell people. Save the RFP process is tough. The applications are, challenging, I think. Give yourself a break and try to get it done early. We're going to now go on to the next sections, which are, there's a technical assistance. Sorry about that. And then we'll go into how to accept an amendment and also how to submit. So if you want to know about more RFPs, you can go to the alert section of the DFSS website. If you have questions on registration or technical assistance stuff, you can also go to customer support at thecityofchicago.org or call that helpline. If you're a person that really learns from looking at PowerPoint and screenshots and videos, here is a link to a lot of training materials that might be helpful. I have a lot of training materials at my disposal, I've developed over the years that I'm happy to send to you for most, sort of routine functions. And so just, give yourself a lot of time and call us if you need it. Carrie is available to answer programmatic questions. I'm available to do the questions for, answer questions about e-procurement, and it should all, should all work out. This should be as stress-free and pleasant experience as possible. So moving along, we're going to talk now about how do you accept an amendment. So we do an amendment, at least one amendment for each RFP, if only to upload this PowerPoint webinar and also to provide a document that talks about your frequently asked questions. Those we also do an amendment if we need to extend the due date, if we find a substantive change that we need to make in the scope of the RFP. You'll see here that the city is very interested in making sure that everybody accepts an amendment and knows what they're accepting and understands that they're going to be held responsible. You can't, just because and that, the expectation on the part of the city and the Department of Procurement Services, as well as DFSS, is that once you have accepted that amendment, you are responsible for the information in that amendment. And if you ignored that amendment, you didn't read it, that's kind of on you if it negatively affected your application in some way. So to get started, we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to say here, the RFP you're interested has been amended. If you have not started an application, you'll need to acknowledge and accept the amendment first. If you have already started an application, you are going to, the part of the process of accepting the amendment is going to pull your started application and everything you've written into the amended RFP. So what you're going to do is you're going to view, everything in blue in e-procurement goes to something else. This is how you can avoid using that back browser button. So to view the amendment history, you would click on that blue view the amendment history. And then if you hadn't already started an application, you would go to the actions button on the right-hand side, do the create quote and hit go. And this is going to take you to the page where you can sort of accept the amendment officially and then get started with your application. So when you're going to accept the amendment, you'll get the screen here that talks about, to be considered for award, you must acknowledge each amendment and submit or resubmit. And by resubmit, they really mean it's going to pull everything that you did. All your responses to ensure that they comply with the changes. So if you want to look at the amended document, you would click on the document number. To review the changes, you would click on the little eyeglasses. And then here you see in the middle, there's that amendment description and the date that it was published. And that's like I wrote in like a 1 or 2 sentence thing, description that says what is contained in the amendment. After you've reviewed all of this stuff, you can go and click on the right-hand side in the Acknowledge Amendments button, and that will take you to the next screen. So we're going to go through several screens. That's the acknowledging and the accepting sort of process. So at this point, you've reviewed in the past screen. You were able to look around. You were able to see what the amendment was about. You were able to view all of the attached amendment documents if you wanted. And here you are, you're going to accept the terms and conditions of the RFQ and acknowledge the changes made in the RFQ for the amended document. So you're going to click that little box, and then on the right-hand side, you're going to hit acknowledge, which will take you to yet another screen that is a confirmation that you confirm your acknowledgement of the amendment. So, just in case this hasn't been driven home to you, you're confirming. And then you're going to say, yes, I confirm. If you say no, you're just going to end up kind of like going back and having to look at all this stuff again. Say, yes, you confirm. You click on that, and it will take you to the following screen. So we're going to go with the next screen here. Thank you. And you are then going to accept the terms and conditions, which says, as you can read, the city makes no representations or warranties that the electronic procurement system used by the city or any procurement will accurately and timely, like all of this sort of stuff. All bidders use the system at their own risk. I don't know. This seems a little harsh to me, but anyway, these are the terms. And here it's tricky. You're going to have to click on the little box at the bottom left-hand side. I have read and accepted the terms and conditions, and then you will click on the accept button, which is on the upper or lower right-hand side. And that is the final step in acknowledging and accepting the amendment. Don't we all feel more complete now? So that is the entire, that's that process. So now we're going to talk about how do you submit an application. So as I indicated a few slides ago, it's not as straightforward as we would all like. It's hardly as satisfying as sort of just, you press send and whoosh, it's gone, and, you're all more complete, as if you weren't complete before accepting the amendment. So you're going to now submit an application. We're going to go to the next slide here. All right. I thought I took that slide out. Anyway, so when you are ready to submit, you're going to save your draft one last time, and then you're going to click continue. When you click continue, the e-procurement system is going to do a whole little assessment. It's going to check all of your work for you. It doesn't check for content, but it checks for empty spaces, right? So you'll get here, next slide, you will get a list of what it found. I'm going to show you, it will often, here is a screen with one error message. We're going to do this error message, which is a common one, and another common one. But often when you click, you'll get like 6 error messages or whatever, and you have to just calm down, take a deep breath, and read them, and then you can resolve them. So in here you say you must quote on at least one line in the RFQ. In e-procurement speak, a quote is an answer, or a quote value sometimes is an answer. And then in this case, we'll go to the next section, the next slide. You can see that one line in here, as you would go to lines, and when you would click on lines, there is it's a budget thing. We like to have people figure out all the different, it's a budget thing that we like to have everybody put like a placeholder in there. We don't actually use the lines as part of the review. We use the budget templates and the budget stuff that you upload, but it's a placeholder thing, so often you have to just put in a 1 or a 0, whatever, a number, whatever number you want, and then save. So here's another error message that people get. A quote value is required for the requirement first name. In this case, you'll look around, you'll see requirements is e-procurement speak for like application, and then the quote value is e-procurement for answer, and then the first name is the name of the actual question. And so at this point, you would just write in the first name, you would save, and you would be on your way. So once you resolve all of your error messages, you'll end up with a screen like this, where you are in review and submit. When you're in the review and submit phase, you'll be able to see your entire application and actually submit. So here we have, you'll save your draft one more time, and then here also you'll have a printable view, which is going to take a PDF, make a PDF of your application. It's not, because you were smart and you saved all of your answers in Word, you have a manipulatable form for your answers. The printable view is nice though, because it does say everything that you've done. It will list every file that you uploaded. It will say all of your answers. And so you have like a record of what's in eProcurement, because as I said, when you press submit, all of that gets sucked away and you really can't get at it again after the application period is closed. So we'll go to the next slide here. And so this is what the review and submit page looks like. So you'll see there's all sorts of answers in the quote values that you can review. If you find a wrong answer, you can go back and make the change. It's a very long page. You scroll down to the bottom, and so at the bottom you'll see, well, yeah, this is where you start actually submitting. So you're going to provide an electronic signature. The way that you fill out that little box is first you put in your name, then you put in your title, and then you click the little box saying that you're submitting. If you do it in a different order and you click the little box first, it's going to give you an error message and you have to do it again. You have to put in your name first and your title. That's how eProcurement wants to roll. And then you'll see in the next slide that actually on the lower right-hand side there is a submit button. So you're going to click submit, and then you will get a confirmation screen. So the confirmation screen is what eProcurement is going to give you immediately about that you have submitted. It will also send a confirmation email to the email that is associated with your application within 24 hours. If you want, it makes you feel better to have like a human person verify that you submitted, if that's what's going to make you happy, please call me or email me, and I will happily look up and confirm. The minute you hit submit, I can see that, and I'm happy to confirm for you either via email or voice that you have in fact made an application. So this is pretty much the end of what I have to say about eProcurement. You've all had maybe some time to think about other questions, if there are some, either about the RFP itself, the program aspects, or if you have eProcurement questions, this is the time to ask them. So I don't see, let's give people a minute, I guess, to do.
Yeah, Julia, while they're thinking of typing any questions in the dashboard, I'm going to go to the next slide. So it shows on the screen your contact information, so people have a minute to copy that down while they're thinking about questions. I don't see any questions yet in the dashboard control panel. Let me look again. You can see the questions on your end as well.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, so I don't know, Carrie, is there anything that you want to add? No.
I don't think so, and I'm not seeing any new questions.
Right.
You just want to go over this last slide with the contact information then?
Sure. So my name is Carrie Moy. If you have any program questions, feel free to give me a call or an email. I would say I prefer an email, but I'm happy to talk to you on the phone too if you think that would be helpful. And then you can also contact Julia for any non-programmatic questions or questions about eProcurement, and her phone number and email are on the slide as well.
Right, and I would just mention, like Carrie indicated, we're all kind of working from home, and so actually if you call the phone number listed here, it's my work number, but it goes to directly to my cell phone, so I'm likely to pick it up at all hours. If I don't, I try to be more professional if I don't recognize the number, but I apologize in advance if I'm not as formal as I might have been if I knew it was a work call.
Same here. That is also my cell phone number. So you can get a hold of me anytime.
Right.
Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this webinar, and we look forward to seeing your responses to the RFP. You don't have any closing things to say, Julia?
I don't. You know, save early, submit often, and we look forward to reading your applications.
I love that. Save early, submit often. Well, thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us.
Yes. Take care.